Batman gets locked up in Arkham Asylum in Alan Grant's Shadow of the Bat, which is the first story in the Shadow of the Bat series, which opens up to the rebuilding of Arkham Asylum under Jeremiah Arkham, who is the nephew of Amadeus Arkham, the founder of the asylum itself. The comic introduces us to Jeremiah while he's speaking to one of the construction workers by the name of Zolly Hiram, who owns the construction company working on the job for Arkham. But while they speak about their inner morals, we are shown in the following panels Jeremiah's origins, as we're shown his near-death experience when he was 16 by a man who was robbing a shop he had entered. But before the man could do anything, Jeremiah suddenly was able to see right inside the man's mind and could see everything that had ever shaped him, and proceeded to speak to the man about his father who had apparently died, which the man thanks him and subsequently shoots himself, as this was the moment that Jeremiah knew that he was destined to follow in his uncle's footsteps, to which were brought back to the present, and Hiram brings Jeremiah a box of Amadeus Arkham's journals that dictated his own descent into madness, as he proceeds to throw the box into the fire, saying that he burns the past and starts with a clean slate. But now that we're introduced to the descendant Arkham, we're now brought into the asylum itself, as we watch as Jeremiah goes to different patients to express their different mental disorders so we can see them firsthand, and the treatment method that Jeremiah puts into effect so he can quote-unquote cure them. But as we get through them all, we start to realize that the methods he applies are more abusive suffering than actual cures, as he tells his men to beat up Cornelius Stark and lets birds fly loose onto the Scarecrow. But his visit to Everard Mallet's room, however, was much different, as in his case, he's a violent schizophrenic, and in this panel, Jeremiah notes down everything that Mallet sees. But in this one instance, he mentions a hero that he saw last night that he never mentioned before, and that he told him that the hero had come to him to free him, as the hero proceeded to disappear into the darkness. I know it's weird that I'm explaining this visit in more context versus the others, but trust me, this one is going to be very important for later, so make sure to remember this. But for now, let's move on to Mr. Zsasz, and interestingly enough, he never is called by his first name like in other iterations, which is Victor, as this is actually his first comic appearance. But back on topic, Jeremiah and Zsasz have a little chat about psychiatric history, which we have no idea how is brought up in the first place, but is then changed to the topic of Jeremiah's history, as Zsasz brings up the meaning behind his name, which means Prophet of Doom after what happened to his uncle Amadeus, as he proceeds to ask him if the madness that his uncle experienced is within him as well, which for a moment actually shakes up Jeremiah, as he's clearly thought of this before, and by the end of the comic you'll know why, but also the fact that he had his uncle's notes from his time in the asylum. But after this, Jeremiah tries to compose himself to act like what Zsasz just said didn't affect him whatsoever, and briefly walks away from the conversation and leaves the room, which takes us to the final cell that Jeremiah visits. And to everyone's surprise, Batman is the last person that he visits in the asylum, as he's chained to a wall, exhibiting very violent behavior, as it's revealed that Batman had actually killed someone. Jeremiah then tells Batman that he's gonna have to sedate him in order to start his treatment, to which Batman obviously opposes to, as the guards try to attack him, which obviously doesn't work, as he manages to take both of them out while still being attached to the wall. But before Batman can escape the room, Jeremiah brings in a hose to stop him, which works, as his guards proceed to beat the hell out of him. And to end the issue off, one of the guards try to take off his mask, which Jeremiah promptly stops him and says the only way he'll ever find out his identity is by the end of this treatment, when Batman himself hands over his cape and cowl. And when that happens, there will be no more Batman ever. Which leads us straight into the second issue, which opens up to what happens before Batman is taken into the asylum, as we see Batman investigating why a little girl is playing with dolls in a cemetery of all places. And by playing, I mean abusing, as she throws one of her dolls into the ground, which Batman later deduces is linked to the abuse she was facing with her own father at home. Batman proceeds to take her back home when we're shown a man with bright yellow hair and a hat on entering the very same house before Batman gets there, as he proceeds to pull out a knife on the woman who answers the door. And once Batman arrives, it's revealed that he killed her entire family. After this realization, Batman proceeds to run upstairs and finds a random man and questions him about what he was doing there, to which he falls unconscious, presumably of fear. And when the GCPD arrives, Batman suspects to Gordon that the crime may have been committed by Victor Zsasz, as according to Batman's investigation, the crime was done very professionally, with the cuts being very similar to how Zsasz used to do them. But the only problem with this theory is that Zsasz had been locked up in the asylum this entire time, so both Batman and Gordon head over there in order to check for themselves. They also mention while they're both in the car that they haven't met Jeremiah yet, and when they finally meet him, Gordon suggests that Zsasz may have escaped, which Jeremiah laughs, which in turn makes Batman mad, since there had just been a triple murder. And Jeremiah tells him that the security system he has installed in the building is formidable and doesn't plan to have a rerun of what happened in his uncle's time. He's so confident about his security that on the way to Zsasz's room, he tells them everything he has installed in the building and essentially gloats about it, almost offended that they think it'd be faulty. But of course, like we all knew, Zsasz was still locked up in the cell. Batman doesn't trust him and makes him get out of bed to show him his scars he has on his body, to see if he had added any new ones to his collection. Because for those of you that don't know about Victor Zsasz, every time he kills someone, he engraves a tally mark on his body to keep count of his victim. And not to our surprise, there weren't any fresh marks on his body, which means that he really didn't leave his cell. And the moment they both leave, Zsasz sits down on the bed and reveals 3 tally marks under his feet, revealing that he really was the one who killed them. Which takes us back to the Batmobile, where Batman hears a radio saying that another murder had taken place, which brings us to the scene of the crime, where Batman shows up a cop that tried to stop him from getting into the building by cuffing him. As we're brought to the actual crime scene, which fits the exact same MO as Zsasz, just like the last one, but Gordon does say that they had just seen him in Arkham, to which Batman responds that these two were killed several hours ago before the girl's family. But when they exit the crime scene, one of the lieutenants were joking around by saying he wondered what channel they were watching, which prompts Batman to immediately attack him, as Gordon and all the others pull a gun on him. And once Gordon pistol whips Batman, knocking him unconscious, they check on the other officer, revealing that he had no pulse and Batman had killed him, which forces Gordon to make the decision to lock Batman up in the asylum. Which swiftly brings us to the top of this tower, where Nightwing and Robin discuss what was told to them by Gordon about Batman, in which Nightwing doesn't believe that Batman had it in him to kill a cop, especially for his standards. Robin then tells him that Gordon said not to interfere, as that would just make matters worse, to which Nightwing leaves the tower still thinking about how Batman could ever do such a thing and really doesn't believe it to be true. Which brings us to the end of the issue, that brings us back to the present day. Batman still locked up at the asylum, as he manages to time his escape against the guards, as he's able to lockpick the chains with the hidden piece of metal in his mouth, as Nightwing arrives to the top of the asylum just in time. And this leads us straight into the third issue, as we see Nightwing pulling a Batman Arkham as he hops down from the roof of the asylum and enters through a ventilation grate on the side of the building. And throughout this entire sequence, he narrates that Batman couldn't have committed this crime, and that every risk Batman took was measured. And as for Batman being deranged enough to kill a cop, he doesn't believe Batman would ever stoop that low. And while in the vent, he hears something moving within the same shaft as him, thinking it's a rat. And not even a second later, it turns out to be Batman doing the same thing. But now we're quickly transitioned to the man in the top hat, aka the killer, who approaches a man in the phone booth, speaking to his wife as he opens the door on the man as he pulls a knife out on him, killing him, and sets him down on a bench just like all his other victims, as he gives himself a tally mark on his arm just like Victor Zsasz. But now we're brought back to the asylum as Batman and Nightwing attempt to avoid a camera in order to get into Jeremiah's office to look through files of his patient. And once they succeed, Batman informs Nightwing of the following crimes that took place, which all fell under Zsasz's MO, and that Zsasz had basically hinted that he was behind it when he visited his cell previously. He also revealed to Nightwing that the whole thing was an act, and that he didn't actually kill the officer, but that he actually played crazy in order to investigate the asylum freely. But as they look through the files, Batman stumbles upon Everard Mallett's file, and I hope you all remember this case because I told you all it'd come up again. Batman begins to read through his case file and everything that he recounted to Jeremiah that he saw last night, that included the nightmares and the hero figure that promised to free him, as Batman says he wanted to question him further. But of course, Jeremiah is notified that there was an intrusion, which leads to the guards coming to the rescue to apprehend Batman. But before we see any further of that scenario, we transitioned into the gambling life of Zolly Hiram, and if you all remembered him, he was the one who helped Jeremiah Arkham with the construction of the asylum at the beginning of the story. But according to these panels, it seems like he's in major gambling debt and gets kicked out of the casino, but on his way out, he's greeted by the man in the top hat who he appears to recognize, but instead of pulling out a knife like he's done like every single one of his victims, he actually pulls out a gun and instructs him into the alleyway, saying that he was going to do him a favor, and in return, the man in the top hat would do him one. But now we're brought back to the asylum, where Batman and Nightwing take on the asylum guards, as well as Jeremiah Arkham. And as soon as Jeremiah calls for external security, Nightwing manages to escape through the ventilation shaft, as Batman finally eases up and gives himself to security, as Jeremiah proceeds to scold him and takes him back to the punishment cell. Which brings us back to Zolly Hiram, who had been found dead in the same alleyway the man had left him, and the cops apparently thinking it was suicide, as Hiram had apparently left a suicide note indicating that his gambling debt was the reason for it, as it was addressed to his wife. And while Gordon and the cops struggle to figure out whether or not Batman's theory is right or wrong, we're brought back to the asylum as we see Zsasz being free from his cell, standing over Mallett's body, as he suffocates him with his pillow and leaves the room so he doesn't say anything to Batman. Which brings us to the next day, as Zsasz is being brought around the asylum in the morning for his routine and talks to Jeremiah about the events that took place last night with Batman, as he tells him if he's able to break Batman, every inmate in the asylum would bow down to him like royalty, which fully interests Jeremiah, as he asks him about it further for a potential plan, to which Zsasz responds by telling him that Batman is a symbol to the villains of Gotham, the man who's always right, the man who always wins. He even admits to never being able to defeat him himself, but he does suggest that he could use Amygdala to further his plan, who for those of you that don't know, also debuts in this comic along with Zsasz. But Jeremiah does take the suggestion into account, as he rushes straight to his cell to acquire him, which is honestly harder than they thought it was going to be, which leads us straight into Batman's punishment cell, as we see him strung by his wrist to the ceiling as the guards come to acquire him for Jeremiah to begin his plan. But on the way to the room, Batman sees Everard Mallett's body being transferred out of his cell, as according to the guard, he had had a heart attack, but we all know Zsasz was the real killer. But before Batman could think too much about it, he's pushed into a dark room, and when lit up, he's faced with several of his adversaries separated by a large piece of glass. And here is when we get to see the first appearance of Hellsinger Eric, also known as Amygdala, as he begins to attack the Dark Knight after saying he doesn't want to fight, and proceeds to toss him around for a couple seconds until Batman Batman lays a smackdown on his ass and knocks him out cold like he was fighting Bane. But of course, Jeremiah watching this clearly isn't satisfied, and to end the issue off, he lets Batman's entire rogues gallery onto him for cleanup duty. Which leads us to the fourth and final issue in the story, as it opens up just where it leaves off, with all the Batman rogues holding him down as they all get their licks in one by one. But of course, in true Batman fashion, he manages to 1v9 all of them and literally takes them down one by one without breaking a sweat, and leaves Joker for last, which is one of the funniest moments in this entire story. And after Jeremiah accepts defeat, he goes back to Zaz's cell and tells him about what happened, to which Zaz tells him that he'll see what he can come up with, and Jeremiah cuts him off saying that it's his asylum and that he will decide what happens to Batman, with Zaz responding thinking that they were working together, which Jeremiah said that he thought wrong and that he should have trusted his own instinct, as he tells his guards to move him back to his cell. But before he leaves the room, Zaz thanks him, to which Jeremiah responds with confusion and frustration, but it is revealed later why he does say this to him. Which brings us back to Batman's cell, as Jeremiah tells him how much he's humiliated him and that the whole plan was Zaz's idea, as Batman questions him and his sanity, as Jeremiah tells him that he has a special talent, which is being able to see directly into the heart of madness, to which Batman responds to him saying that he's just scared to think that maybe he himself has gone mad, to which Jeremiah angrily tells him why would he have become a psychiatrist and the head of the asylum if he was scared, and just storms out of the room. But here is where the thank yous that Zaz gave to Jeremiah is revealed, as Batman figures out that the real reason Zaz gave Jeremiah the plan in the first place is because he knew Batman would be able to take down all of the rogues and get sent into special treatment, which allows for Zaz to escape with all the eyes on Batman instead of him, which is what we see in the very next set of panels, as we watch how Zaz was able to escape from his cell even with all the high-tech security the asylum has installed, as we watch him unlock a secret hatch from inside his cell, which is revealed to have been built by Zolly Hiram himself, that's connected to the ventilation route within the building. And now we're brought back to Nightwing as he goes to investigate Hiram's house for himself for any leads that would connect him to Zaz. But before we see any more of that, we're transitioned back to Batman as he manages to escape once again with another lockpick. But before he leaves the cell, he hears a knock on the other side of the wall, which he recognizes as Morse code that translates to Punisher, Punished, Innocent, Wildy, and Ha Ha Ha, which comes from Zaz from within the wall, as he's dressed up in his top hat and suit as always. But going back to Nightwing's end of the investigation, he manages to find a book that stood out from all the others that doesn't fit with the name Famous Lives, and in it he finds the plans to Arkham Asylum, presumably the ones that was used when he was working on it. Batman, on the other hand, has to find a way to actually make it out of his cell without triggering the alarms, as the motion detector system uses microwave that triggers the moment movement is detected out of the cells that isn't one of the staff. And while he figures this out, Nightwing manages to inform Gordon about the evidence that he has on Zaz and how he's able to escape from Arkham through the tunnels Hiram built, as he tells him to meet him back at the asylum. And now we watch as Batman crawls on the floor wearing aluminum made from his cape, which allows the microwaves to bounce off him, not triggering the alarm. But now we see as Zaz arrives to the tunnels under the asylum and tries to loosen the mortar to collapse the entire passageway, but is interrupted by Nightwing as he knew exactly where he was going to be. And while all this is happening, Batman is still crawling on the floor, flooded with heat because of the aluminum cape. But right after he manages to get the full way and dodge detection, he manages to get his way to Mallet's cell, no doubt because this was the cell that Zaz had been using to escape from the asylum all this time, as Batman recalls that Mallet had seen someone enter his cell but died before he could ask him about it. Batman manages to find the entryway into the secret tunnel, which leads us back to the face-off with Nightwing and Zaz, where Zaz manages to outsmart him by letting some of the bricks he was bringing down crash onto Nightwing. And just before Zaz can lay his knife on Nightwing, Batman bursts out of nowhere and saves his life, with Commissioner Gordon and GCPD managing to get to the asylum and telling the officers to free Batman and Jeremiah to lead them to Zaz's cell. Which brings us back to Zaz's fight with Batman, as Zaz actually manages to land a good kick on Batman, which knocks him down and turns into several more kicks and a really bad knife wound, as Zaz manages to slice his chest as Batman tries to get up, but in the end leaves him open for an attack, which ends the fight with a swift punch to the face and takedown from Batman. And now we reach the realization of Jeremiah Arkham as he's brought to the cell of Victor Zsasz and realizes that he actually managed to outsmart him and the high-tech security system that he thought would stop any escapes, which they proceed to also realize that Batman escaped along with him through one of the tunnels in Mallet's room. But of course, to end the issue off, Batman returns back up to the asylum along with Zsasz and Nightwing as Jeremiah becomes furious and tells his guards to take them back to their cells, until Gordon reveals to him that it was all an elaborate setup, for which he calls Batman crazy, and Batman quickly gives him a reality check and tells Jeremiah to look into Zaz's eyes to know what madness truly is, which triggers Batman to lay way into Jeremiah as he tells him that Nightwing luckily informed him that he wasn't involved with Hiram, but he warns him that he doesn't know if Zsasz had corrupted him or if he really is as sick as he seems. But from now on, he'll be watching him, and if he puts one foot in the wrong direction, he'll be there to drop him instantly, which ends off the issue with the narrator saying that after that night, Jeremiah Arkham was changed forever, that he wasn't ever able to sleep again, as every time he closed his eyes, all he saw was Victor Zsasz in his mind. And just like his uncle Amadeus once did, he himself started his own journal to record his descent to into madness as he looks himself in the mirror, questioning what it was he really saw in there. And with that, we reached the end of the video. Hope you all enjoyed this video, and in my opinion, I really like the story as it's both Zaz's and Jeremiah's first appearance in Batman ever, and shows a cool reflection of how Jeremiah turns more and more into his uncle. As most of us probably know, he actually turns into the second Black Mask, but that's a story for another day. But for now, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, as I post videos every single week, and let me know in the comments what other comics you'd like to see me cover on the channel, because it's really fun and I really enjoy reading new comics. Click on the best symbol to check out my Arkham Knight comic breakdown, and click on the video to the right of that to see a video I think you'll like on my channel, because if you like this video, you'll definitely like that one. Hope you'll have an amazing rest of your day, and I'll see you all next week with another video. Peace!